Now news on India's economy. Not very good news, I'm afraid. India's index of industrial output grew at a mere 0.1% for April 2012 from the same period in the past fiscal. Now this is much below an expectation of 1.7%. In fact, some economists were even expecting a rebound. Well, let's go across to Shweta Rajpal Kohli for more.
Yesterday, we've had the Standard & Poor's come out with a report saying that perhaps India may lose its investment grade status. And the response that we got from the Finance Ministry is that we reject this report. Isn't it high time that we start talking about credible fiscal and monetary action to actually arrest the slowdown rather than rejecting reports? Mr. Pai.
Absolutely. I think the finance ministry is in denial. The government is in denial. It's like the saying, Nero is fiddling when Rome is burning. And now you want to shoot the messenger and shoot S&P for saying that India is in bad shape. All of us know that India's economy is in bad shape. But we're waiting for some action because government has to control the fiscal deficit. Government has to send positive messages to people that they're going to give approvals. Look at the coal sector. Investment is not having, policy is not happening. Look at the power sector. They're starving because of coal and we're not seeing any action.
Hey, but Krishnamurthy, if I could come to you on what's expected here on, because this is a very, very critical week. We've seen industrial output data coming out. We're also expecting inflation data to come out on Thursday. And on Monday, the Reserve Bank will meet to decide whether or not it needs to cut rates further. Most analysts actually believe that a rate cut is almost necessary, especially today's data once again pointing to the kind of slowdown in growth that we are seeing.
Shweta, actually, I am not that certain that a rate cut will actually do the job. The problem here essentially is a lot more fundamental. As I've been saying, the government has been refuting on two fronts. Firstly, it's been saying this, slowdown is because of global economy. Now, I must point out here that, a country like Indonesia, which is much smaller than us, essentially has been growing a lot more robustly. Now, also take into account the fact that if a country is small, its exposure to global economic factors is a lot more. And despite that, the country has been growing very well. In fact, now people are talking about BRIC, the I in BRIC being replaced by Indonesia rather than India. And India could be the first fallen angel. So the first thing that the government needs to do is to essentially say, okay, things are bad. Let's try and get the ship in order. The second thing, and this is again something that came out in the S&P report yesterday, which essentially talks about that it's not the coalition dharma, not the problem essentially created by coalition partners, but the essential contradictions in the government itself which are causing the problem. The fact that you essentially have a prime minister who does not have political authority and another center of power which basically doesn't seem to believe as much in letting the market forces unleash, having reforms. So I would essentially add to what Mr. Mohandas Pai was saying. It is not just the retrospective amendment. We've been basically dragging our feet on the essential reforms that are required, particularly on the supply side, to take care of both inflation and economic growth. And if we go ahead with these reform measures, we've basically shot ourselves in the foot. A lot of what we are getting is just because of the mismanagement of the economy over the last several years, in particular, UPA too. So what they need to do is first acknowledge there is a problem, and then second, go and think about ways to fix the problem, not just dilly-dally as they did, again in the example of the pension sector reforms. Now remember, pension sector, it's very critical, all over the world, pension funds are the ones that essentially bring in money for the long run, and we need money essentially for infrastructure investment. So opening up the pension sector will essentially, open up money for investment in infrastructure. And here again, I want to point out that, our politicians are also being very, very sort of myopic. They're looking at one segment. Yes, some of the middle class, essentially, they might expose to some more volatility on their pension funds. But what is critical is that, what about the price rise that is happening? Taking into account some of these bottlenecks will essentially bring down inflation. So it is critical that essentially economists tell the politicians the full picture of what needs to happen and maybe basically call the bluff.
Right, calling the bluff is important. Mr. Pai, we could just conclude this discussion with closing comments from you, because what's also interesting is how the Standard & Poor's report actually pointed out to several political roadblocks in economic growth, citing particularly the divided leadership at the center as one of the main reasons why they believe that there isn't very much hope that economic growth can actually take place, and that's why a very stern warning coming of a possible downgrade.
Absolutely, Shweta. The Standard & Poor is like a mirror showing us our own face and making us see the reality and the truth. And I think what is happening here is a disgrace, is a total abandoning of the responsibility by the government, and government living in a make-believe world. I mean, I'm shocked at the disbelief, shocked with disbelief at what the government is saying, that don't bother about the Cassandras who say there's going to be no growth. Growth is going to be there. How can growth come when there's no industrial production? How can growth come when there's no investment? How can growth come when there's no confidence to invest? How can growth come when we're having a large fiscal deficit, a large trade deficit, and is growing? There seems to be no way out. The rupee is getting hammered, and everybody is sitting on quietly and said, don't bother, things are going to work out. Things are not going to work out. I think maybe the solution could be that with the new president coming on shortly, we may have a new finance minister, and maybe there is a little bit of hope if the new incumbent comes on the seat. Till then, Shweta, I think it's going to be downhill, and this is going to be the year of discontent for all of us.
A year of discontent, even as all eyes there on those very critical presidential elections. Will there be a change of guard at North Block? That's something everyone's waiting to find out. Mr. Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, Mr. Mohandas Pai, many thanks for joining us and sharing your views.
Do you have the NDTV Profit app? All the markets, all the news in your own homemade, ready-made portfolio available there for you.
We will right now answer what you should sell, what you should buy when markets are down.
Download at ndtvprofit.com/apps. Get the best app from the channel you trust.